Good evening. It's good to be here with you this evening. I appreciate those who have traveled long distances. I was talking to a few people before services, and some of you came an hour and a half to be here, and so that means a lot to me. I feel a little burdened sometimes when you come that far. You know, I hate for you to come that far and it not go well tonight, but I hope that it does go well. I hope that you learned something tonight. I hope that you're edified by being here. And if not by me, I hope by these songs that we've sung, by the prayers that we've offered, by the encouragement that you receive from other people. I hope that you can say it was good to be here tonight. I certainly am encouraged that you're here. And just the fact that you're here, interested in God's Word, that gives me hope. Hope for you and for where you worship and where you're working, and that you love the Lord and you love His Word and you want to know more, and you want to know more about how to communicate it to other people. And so I just want to let you know I appreciate that, and that's encouraging to me. We started our series yesterday, which we have titled this week, That You May Believe. Our goal is to try this week to give you some evidences so that you might believe in God, just the fact that there is a God, as we have just sung, that He is alive, to believe in His Word, to believe in His Son. We're going to focus on different areas of those evidences each night, and for these first few lessons, we're focusing more on just believing that there is a God, that He exists, and that He is alive. And tonight we want to do that by presenting to you an argument that I think is one of the newer arguments when we think about evidences and evidences arguments. It's called the information argument. The information argument. This argument is really a subset of an argument that we made yesterday. Yesterday we talked about the teleological argument, which is just in simple terms the design argument. The fact that when we see design in our galaxy, in our universe, with the earth, in our atmosphere, with where the moon is, when we see design in our bodies, in our human bodies, when we see design even down to things that you can only see with a microscope. We're going to look at that here tonight. But when we see design in all those things, it forces us to conclude that there must have been a designer, someone who is supremely wise and intelligent, who could have created this world and the life that we see in this world in the very unique and powerful and awesome ways that it's been created. And so this lesson is really a smaller section of that, but it deserves really its own lesson because it takes a little time to try to cover it and think about it. I want to start with this, though. If you take a look at this rock that you see with all kinds of writings on it, this is what's called the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone. It's a picture of the Rosetta Stone. And this stone was discovered in 1799 by French soldiers who were rebuilding a fort in Egypt. This stone was carved in 196 BC, and it's a significant find because it contains 2 languages written in 3 different scripts. It contains the language of Egypt and Greek in the hieroglyphic. That was the language that was used by the religious leaders. And then there was also a language on there, which was the language used by the common people. And it also contains Greek, which was the language that was used by the rulers of Egypt. This stone was likely created so it could be read by the religious rulers, the common man, and the political rulers of Egypt. And so it's 3 languages. And the reason why it's important that there are 3 languages here on this stone, translating essentially the same thing, is because it has been used, this stone, to help decipher and to translate ancient hieroglyphics, and it's today housed in the British Museum. All of that history aside, here's why I'm showing you a picture of the Rosetta Stone. It's because I have a question for you. What is the source of the information written on this stone? Do you think that the source of these 3 different languages that have been written on this stone, do you think that the source was just mere random chance? That we happen to have 3 different languages all written on one rock? Or do you think that these 3 different languages indicate that there was some obviously intelligent source behind the information? I think most of us know the answer to that question, right? Most of us here would unanimously agree. I don't want to say most of us would unanimously, because there's always one nut in every audience that I ever preach at. But I think most of us would unanimously agree, for the most part, that information suggests an intelligence, right? Let me give you some other examples of that. If you take a look at just something as simple as a smoke signal, right? If you have someone taking this smoke and they're throwing it out there in different forms, you must conclude that someone sent the smoke signal. The smoke signal did not make itself. There was a sender, and the sender was trying to send a signal to hopefully a receiver who can receive that information. Or let's get a little more complex and complicated, and let's think about the writings of William Shakespeare. When you look at all the things that Shakespeare wrote, I have a simple quote here from Shakespeare. Have more than you show, speak less than you know. But when you think of quotes like this from Shakespeare, Shakespeare's intelligent mind leads to his well-written works, right? Shakespeare's plays didn't write themselves. When we see the works of Shakespeare, the writings of Shakespeare, it causes us to conclude that this information must have come from someone who was very crafty, very good with words, had an ability that's far beyond the ability of most average people when you read the writings of Shakespeare. Well, let's take a look at another type of information. Take a look at the information that sometimes is what we call binary code. The information that the computer people use. I'm not a computer person, so I can't tell you a whole lot more about it than that. But guys like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and people like that have become well known in our culture and here in America. In order for someone to write this type of code, to do this type of programming, it takes an intelligent source to write a computer program or to write a computer code. A lot of kids go to school for 4 or 5 years trying to learn how to write these types of codes so they can enter into these types of fields. But the information, we know this, that's in binary code, it doesn't write itself. When you have information, it suggests that there is someone smart enough to communicate that information, create that information, and put it out there. Or even something as simple as a birthday cake decorator. When you see happy birthday on top of a cake, right, it takes some intelligence to even decorate a cake. The simple message, happy birthday, it doesn't come from nowhere. It doesn't write itself. It's not on there just by random chance that there just happened to be something that spelled out happy birthday on top of the cake. Someone was communicating something purposefully with that information. Well, let me give you another consideration when it comes to information. I want you to think about our genetic code. I want you to think about what's written into each of our cells in our body. What we know is the genetic code. It's the information that is found in DNA. What's the source of that information? When my son was a senior, he's been out of high school for a couple of years now, but when my son was a senior, I was about to preach this lesson, and I asked him, without telling him what I was preaching on, I said, hey, what do you know about DNA? What have they taught you in school about DNA? And he said to me, which I was surprised he knew something, so sometimes I wonder if he slept through school his entire life, but apparently he didn't. He knew something about it. He said, well, I know there is a lot of information stored in DNA. He said, one thing I learned in school was that if they were to take the information in the tight coils of DNA and they were to stretch out that information, it would reach to the sun and back about 5 times. I don't know where he got that information from, but that was something that was impressed upon him in one of his science classes, no doubt. Now, he mentioned some other things that he knew about DNA, and I don't want to bore you with all those things, but I want you to see that even a typical high school senior has been taught that there is a significant amount of information that is stored in our DNA. Now, why does this matter? What does this prove? Well, basically, the reason why this is important, especially when we talk to other people about the fact that there is a God, and we try to ask them questions to, give them reasons and evidences as to why there is a God. Especially people who claim that they don't believe in a God. They only believe in material things. They're materialists. Most materialists are atheists. Sometimes they call themselves Darwinists. Sometimes they call themselves evolutionists. But there's a lot of different titles that are used. But a materialist does not believe in the soul, the spirit, God, angels, heaven, hell, eternal things. They only believe in the material universe. Well, the idea of this information that is stored in the genetic code basically destroys the very basis of materialism. It admits that there has been a non-material entity which has impacted and been organized within a material entity. And the question of where did this information come from is the real DNA enigma. I want to point something out about this too. When did we start discovering all the information that was found in DNA? Was it before Darwin or was it after Darwin? It was after Darwin, right? We only have known about this for the past few decades. Certainly not back into the time of Darwin. So Darwin didn't even know a thing about DNA and the information that's stored in the genetic code. There are some things Darwin did not know, and yet we sometimes claim that he's the poster child of evolution and things like that. There is some scientific information he did not know, and it forces us sometimes to re-examine the conclusions we think that we have made about whether there is or is not a God based upon the things that he taught and others like him when we consider these evidences. The DNA enigma is not this. What is the structure of DNA? I'm not here to talk to you about that. Watson and Crick solved that mystery. The DNA enigma is not, well, what does the information do? I'm not a science teacher. I'm not here to tell you what all this information does. If you want to YouTube it, what does DNA do? There are great videos where people can document and explain what DNA does a lot more clearly than I can here tonight. But the DNA enigma, the question that we want to ask for our spiritual purposes tonight is, where did the information found in DNA come from? And let's point out, a materialist believes all of this information must have happened because they don't believe in a God, or they don't believe in intelligent design. They don't believe in those things. They believe all this happened by random, purposeless, undirected, unguided material processes. It's either that or it's the product of some kind of designing intelligence. Now, let me point out to you why I would say materialists think that. I'm going to quote to you from someone who would consider herself a materialist. This is Madeline Murray O'Hare, and she once wrote a book called What on Earth is an Atheist? And this is one of the things that she said, and some of you, I heard someone grunt, I think, after I mentioned Madeline Murray O'Hare. She's a quite caustic person in her heyday. But she said this one time: we atheists, we try to find some basis of rational thinking on which we can base our actions and our beliefs, and we have it. Now stop there, because that really irritates me, because it makes an assumption that so many people make, that you Christians, when you became a Christian, you just checked your brain at the curb and you don't have a rational, logical basis for why you believe what you believe. That is not true. It's not true. When I became a Christian, I didn't check my brain at the door. I've got rational, logical, evidential reasons as to why I believe in God, in His Word, and in His Son. And I spent a lot of time trying to teach on those things because there's evidence behind why we believe what we do. But she goes on to say, we accept, this is the materialists, we accept the technical philosophy of materialism. She says it is a valid philosophy which cannot be discredited. You can claim that all you want, but I think we're going to discredit it tonight. Essentially, materialism's philosophy holds that nothing exists but natural phenomena. There are no supernatural forces, no supernatural entities such as gods or heavens or hells or life after death. That's the belief of materialists. It's all you see in the material world, that's all there is. Well, how does a naturalist or a materialist How do they explain the non-material organization of information that is found in DNA? That's the question that we want to consider. Now, this code in DNA, it's a recent development in the origins debate. As I mentioned with Darwin, Darwin's Origin of Species, that was written in 1859. 1859. There's a whole lot that I could say about Darwin. I'm thinking about saying it right now, but I probably shouldn't. But I've got other lessons on that, but we'll just leave it there. Darwin's Origin of Species is written in 1859. Scopes monkey trial, where we debated whether or not we should teach evolution in schools, or whether or not we should teach evolution with creationism in schools. Some of those things were talked about during the Scopes monkey trial. Well, that took place in 1925. That's when our school system started making these types of decisions, back in 1925. We didn't have this information, I want to point out to you, when Darwin wrote his books. We didn't have it during the Scopes monkey trial. The first DNA model came out in 1953. Francis Collins, who writes the book The Language of God, which I have in my trunk, I didn't bring it in here, but he's part of the team of people who was actually honored and recognized by Bill Clinton in a ceremony for being one of those who helped break down the code that exists in DNA. Francis Collins believes there's a God, and he's one of the leading scientists on that team. He writes a book about it. It's called The Language of God. So don't tell me that it's just dumb people who believe in God. There's highly intelligent, wise, smart people who, at least from our world standards, who are believers in God. But the first DNA model doesn't come out until 1953. And that's important because, as Lee Strobel points out in The Case for a Creator, he says one of the most extraordinary discoveries of the 20th century was that DNA actually stores information. The detailed instructions for assembling proteins in the form of a 4-character digital code, that's stored in DNA. Darwin didn't know about it, and nobody that debated the Scopes monkey trial knew about it. I should think for a moment about the complexity of the cell, and this might be the honors portion of today's lesson, and it might be the portion where you check out mentally, and that's okay. If you need to check out for a minute, take a bathroom break, just come back in 2 minutes, we'll be done. But I want you just to think about how complex the cell is. Bruce Albert, who's the president of the National Academy of Sciences, states this. He says, "We have always underestimated the cell." Just a single cell. The entire cell can be viewed as a factory that contains an elaborate network of interlocking assembly lines, each of which is composed of a set of large protein machines. Why do we call them machines? He says, precisely because the machines invented by humans to deal efficiently with the macroscopic world, these protein assemblies contain highly coordinated moving parts. And we kind of have just broken down in cartoon form what this cell looks like. But as you can see, if we were to kind of put it in a assembly line, mechanical engineering type of form, it's a process. It works much like a machine on a very microscopic level. Take a look at this chart, and as I said, watch YouTube videos if you want to know more about how this stuff works. This is just my quick explanation. This is a quote, though, from Bert Thompson, who writes in his book Rock Solid Faith. He says a human body is composed of over 30 different kinds of cells. I mean, we have red blood cells, white blood cells, nerve cells. But he says the human body totals approximately 100 trillion cells in an average adult. 100 trillion cells are inside of each of you here tonight. These cells come in a variety of shapes and sizes. They have different functions. They have different life expectancies. He says cells have 3 major components. First, each cell is composed of a cell membrane that encloses the organism. Second, inside the cell is a 3-dimensional cytoplasm. That's a watery matrix which contains specialized organelles. And third, within the cytoplasm is the nucleus, which contains most of the genetic material. And that serves as the control center of the cell. Now, inside the cytoplasm, there are over 20 different chemical reactions occurring at any one time, with each cell containing 5 major components for, number 1, communication. Just a single cell. You have 100 trillion of them, but the single cell, it communicates. It's involved in waste disposal. It's involved in nutrition. It's involved in repairing. It's also involved in reproduction. The nucleus is the control center of the cell, and it's separated from the cytoplasm by a nuclear membrane. Now, within the nucleus is the genetic machinery of the cell. That's chromosomes and genes that contain deoxyribonucleic acid. That's DNA. Deoxyribonucleic acid is DNA. The DNA is a supermolecule that carries the coded information for the replication of the cell. If the DNA from a single human cell were removed from the nucleus and unraveled, it's found in the cell in a spiral configuration. It would be approximately 6 feet long. It would contain over 1 billion biochemical steps. Did you hear that number? Each cell, if we just pulled it out, right, it would contain over 1 billion biochemical steps. It has been estimated that if all the DNA in an adult human were placed end to end, it would reach the sun and back 400 times. My son said 5 times. The DNA molecule does something that we as humans have yet to accomplish. It stores coded information in a chemical format, and then it uses a biologic agent, that's RNA, to decode and activate it. Human technology has not yet advanced to the point of storing information chemically as is done in the DNA molecule. All right, check. If you checked out, check back in. Okay? But just the single cell, just the DNA in a single cell, it is incredibly complex, filled with tons and tons of information. Let some other people explain it to you. This is Francis Collins, who's the head of the Human Genome Project. He wrote this. He said the human genome consists of all the DNA of our species, the hereditary code of life. Code, information. This newly revealed text was 3 billion letters long. It was written in a strange and cryptographic 4-letter code, such as the amazing complexity of the information carried within each cell of the human body, that a live reading of that code, this is how much information is found in just the DNA in a single cell. A live reading of that code at a rate of 3 letters per second would take 31 years. Even if reading continued day and night, printing these letters out in regular font size on normal bond paper, binding them all together would result in a tower the height of the Washington Monument. That's a lot of information that's in your cells. This is how George Sim Johnson wrote about it. He said, human DNA contains more organized information than the Encyclopedia Britannica. But does anyone deny that the Encyclopedia Britannica was written by someone or a group of authors that were highly intelligent? No one denies that. DNA has more organized information than you can find in the Encyclopedia Britannica. If the full text of the encyclopedia were to arrive in computer code from outer space, most people would regard this as proof of the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence. Isn't it amazing, by the way, that some people will give more credit to aliens than they will to a supreme and all-knowing God? But he says, hey, if this showed up just on Earth one day, people would say, well, E.T. exists, you know? But when seen in nature, when people see it in our bodies, it's explained as the workings of random forces. Richard Dawkins, we quoted him yesterday some from Oxford. He said, the machine code of the genes is uncannily computer-like. This is from an atheist. It's from a materialist himself, but he has to admit the DNA is uncannily computer-like, code-like. A couple more quotes, and then I'm going to get to our conclusion here. But this is from Kenneth Bowen, Robert Bowman Jr.'s book, Compelling Evidences, 20 Compelling Evidences That God Exists. By the way, I quote from some of these books because I'm hoping if you're on the fence with some of this and you want to read more, I'm just barely touching the hem of the garment this week, go buy some books and read. There's a lot of people that have written fantastic material, and this is a good book. It says, it is undeniable that the information conveyed by DNA is extremely complex. It's very much like a set of blueprints for the construction of a factory series of machines. The complexity of DNA has a highly ordered, meaningfully specific complexity. It's comparable to a lengthy manual or a cookbook or a set of blueprints with numerous precise specifications that are intricately coordinated. We have then good reason to infer that DNA was intelligently designed and not the result of purely unguided, unplanned natural processes. And I quote several people because I want you to know it's just not one crazy person who's saying these things. There's several people who are making the same argument. Dr. Stephen Meyer is quoted in The Case for a Creator, again, a very intelligent person who has written extensively on these types of subjects. He says if you reflect on that, you realize that computers run on software programs that are produced by intelligent engineers, right? Software, intelligence. Information that comes from software, from intelligent people. Every experience we have about information, whether it's a computer code, hieroglyphic inscription, a book, a cave painting, it points towards intelligence. And the same is true about the information inside every cell in every living creature. He goes on to say, a lot of people talk about the prebiotic soup, the chemicals that supposedly existed on the primitive earth prior to life. Even if you had the right chemicals to create a living cell, you would also need information for how to arrange them in very specific configurations in order to perform biological functions. And ever since the 1950s and 1960s, biologists have recognized that these cells' critical functions are usually performed by proteins, and proteins are the product of assembly instructions stored in DNA. The origin for information in DNA, which is necessary for life to begin. It is best explained by an intelligent cause rather than any of the types of naturalistic causes that scientists typically use to explain biological phenomena. And again, he says, neither chance nor chance combined with natural selection nor self-organizational processes have the causal power to produce information. But we do know of one entity that does have the required causal powers to produce information, and that's intelligence. He says, I think the information revolution taking place in biology is sounding the death knell for Darwinism and chemical evolutionary theories. The attempt to explain the origin of life solely from chemical constituents is effectively dead now. Naturalism cannot answer the fundamental problem of how to get from matter and energy to biological function without the infusion of information from an intelligence. The information suggests an intelligent designer. This is from The Mystery of Life's Origin. This is Thaxton, Bradley, and Olson. They say, we know that in numerous cases, certain effects always have intelligent causes, such as dictionaries, sculptures, machines, paintings. In like manner, an intelligible communication via radio signal from some distant galaxy that would be widely hailed as evidence of an intelligent source. Why then doesn't the message sequence on the DNA molecule also constitute prima facie evidence for an intelligent source? After all, DNA information is not just analogous to a message sequence such as Morse code. It is such a message sequence. So we believe that if this question is considered, it will be seen that most often it is answered in the negative simply because it is thought to be inappropriate to bring a creator into science. Sometimes we have these anti-supernatural presuppositions that cause us to, because we just can't believe that a God could have anything to do with it, we have to look for some other alternative. And yet, when an all-wise and all-knowing and supreme God makes the most sense for understanding why we have this incredibly complex information found in the cell, then why not just go ahead and admit it? Andrews observed, and I'm just quoting multiple people to make the same point basically. He says, it is not possible for a code of any kind to arise by chance or accident. A code is the work of an intelligent mind. Even the cleverest dog or chimpanzee could not work out a code of any kind. It is obvious then that chance cannot do it. This could not have been the work of chance or accident than could the Moonlight Sonata be played by mice running up and down the keyboard of my piano. codes do not arise from chaos. And one more from quantum evolution. He says 1 billion universes, each populated by billions of typing monkeys, could not type out a single gene of this genome. These are scientists saying this whole idea that this could have happened by chance is a joke. That's the crazy argument to make. That's the one that should be portrayed as being pure lunacy. To think that all of this information could just come here from pure chance, just randomly. There's been some interesting research done on this, and you'll find it in some of the answers in Genesis material on the laws of information. And I simply point some of these things out to you so you can see some of the work and the research that's been done, and so you can see how recent this is. July of 2006, we're within 20 years of this research on the information argument, which is why I say this is one of the newer arguments. This isn't something you probably heard 40, 50 years ago from people who were trying to argue the existence of God. It says in July 2006, a team of scientists met to evaluate a definition of information that would be universal. So UDI, Universal Definition of Information. And it says the team evaluated two fundamental laws of information. Fundamental law number one was this: a purely material entity, such as physiochemical processes, cannot create a non-material entity. And so what that simply means is something material cannot create something non-material. Fundamental law number two is that information is a non-material fundamental entity. It is not a property of matter. To illustrate, a blank CD, some of you may be too young to remember CDs, that's making me feel kind of old, but a blank CD, that's material. But the information that's on a CD is non-material. It doesn't have any weight. It doesn't have any mass. It's a non-material entity, the information that's on it. A cell is material, but the information that is written into the DNA is non-material. And that implies a few things. The point they're trying to make is this. Since the DNA code of all life forms is clearly within the UDI definition domain of information, we conclude there must be a sender. Someone must have sent the information, put the information that is there on that material entity. Since the density and complexity of the DNA encoded information is billions of times greater than man's present technology, we conclude the sender must have been supremely intelligent. These are just logical conclusions. Whoever put that information there must have been very intelligent. Since, number three, the sender must have encoded or stored the information into the DNA molecules and constructed the molecular biomachines required for the encoding, the decoding, and the synthesizing processes, and designed all the features for the original life forms, we conclude the sender must be purposeful and supremely powerful. And then they go on to point out, number four, since information is a non-material fundamental entity and cannot originate from purely material quantities, we conclude the sender must have had a non-material component, spirit. God is spirit. And since information is a non-material fundamental entity and cannot originate from purely material quantities, and since information also originates from man, we conclude man's nature must have a non-material component. Man has a spirit. And we conclude that the assumption the universe is composed solely of mass and energy, that's false. There's more to this universe than just matter, just mass and just energy. And their final conclusion is we conclude that all theories of chemical and biological evolution are false. You can find that in the New Answers book too, if you want to look at the entire thing. Now, these scientific laws governing the UDI domain, they've refuted the presupposition of atheism, of humanism, and the like, and including the theories of chemical and biological evolution. They've confirmed the existence of an eternal, all-knowing, all-powerful being, and that is God. But I want to finish up by pointing out to you what God's Word has said about God all along. That if we would just read it, we wouldn't have to go through the complexity of this lesson, because we would already know this about God. Jeremiah wrote this, "Ah, Lord God, it is you who have made the heavens and the earth by your great power and by your outstretched arm. Nothing is too hard for you." The God who created the universe, who created you, and who created that little genetic code that's inside of each and every one of us in every single cell, DNA. Nothing is too hard for him. Nothing is too hard for the Lord. The all-knowing God made man in his image, we're told in Genesis 1:26. God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." So just as he is wise and knowledgeable, and just as he is spirit, he has also given us a spirit. And he's also given us the capability of wisdom and knowledge to a far lesser degree, but he has made us in his image. I want to read to you, just as we kind of finish up, I just want to read to you from a chapter in the book of Job. Now, you remember Job was questioning God quite a bit as he went through his bout of suffering. And he went through a great deal. He lost his servants, he lost his children, he lost his riches and his wealth, he lost his own health, and all those things caused him to question God, caused him to question God's purposes. You know, when you start questioning God and questioning God's purposes, that kind of puts you in a bad seat, because you start playing God. You start thinking you know better than God. You're wiser than God. I wouldn't have done it that way, God. I'd rather do it this way. And after Job goes through this series of his friends accusing him of sin and him denying that he's sinful and yet still complaining about God and questioning why God has done what he's done, God had something to say to Job with all his questioning. Job 36, and I'm going to read from the contemporary English version. I don't usually do that, but I think it just makes it so just plain for the point we're trying to make here. That's why we're using it. It says, "From out of a storm the Lord said to Job, you who think you know more than me, you who think you know my purposes, you know better. The Lord said to Job, why do you talk so much when you know so little?" I love that question, and I think there's a few scientists who maybe we could ask that question too. Why do you talk so much when you really know so little? So God says, now get ready to face me. Can you answer the questions I ask? Essentially, do you really? Let's see how much you know. And so God goes on to ask some questions. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? You know how I did that? That's what he's asking. Where were you? You weren't there, were you, Job? I was there, and I know how it was done. Tell me, he says, if you have understanding, who determined its measurements? Surely you know. God's being a little bit tongue-in-cheek with Job here. Surely you know, Job, because you know so much about me, about how things should work. He says, who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? He goes on to ask more questions. Who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb? When I made clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed limits for it and set bars and doors. In other words, Job, do you know why the sea stops where it stops? Do you know why the tides operate the way that the tides operate? We've explained some of that yesterday. We know a little bit more about that now than we knew before, but Job certainly had no idea. He says, thus far shall you come and no farther, and here shall your proud waves be stayed. Job, do you know why the ocean comes to this point and then it draws back? Do you know how all that works? Because I do. I'm the one who created it, is essentially what God is saying. I know. I don't think you know more than me. You need to be careful that you're not presuming to know more than me. He goes on to say, have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place? that it might take hold of the skirts of the earth and the wicked be shaken out of it. It is changed like clay under the seal. Its features stand out like a garment. From the wicked, their light is withheld and their uplifted arm is broken. Again, do you know why we have sunrise and sunset? Do you know how that works with all the seasons? Do you know how important that is to vegetation and crops and your very life itself? Do you know why things operate and function like that? Have you entered into the springs of the sea? Job had no idea there were springs in the sea. In fact, until Matthew Maury discovered springs in the sea in the 1900s, there's a statue of him over in Baltimore, but he was the first one to discover that there are springs in the sea. But Job had no idea that there were springs in the middle of the sea. Have you walked in the recesses of the deep? God asked. Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Have you seen the gates of deep darkness? Have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? And God says to him, declare if you know all this. Where is the way to the dwelling of light? And where is the place of darkness? That you may take it to its territory, that you may discern the paths to its home. You know, for you were born then, and the number of your days is great. God, again, being very sarcastic, we might say, with Job. You must be old enough to know about why there's light and dark, and where the light is, and where it's stored, and those types of things. No, Job, you don't know, do you? That's what he's getting across. He's pointing out Job's ignorance. He says, have you entered the storehouses of the snow? Have you seen the storehouses of the hail? We, maybe because of meteorology, and we know a little bit more about storms, but I still don't know anybody that knows how to stop a tornado yet, or a hurricane from happening. We study it and study it and study it, and all we can say is, it's coming. We can't control it. Do you know about the snow, about the hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war? God is, I think, admitting here that he uses sometimes natural phenomena for his purposes, and he did in the Old Testament. What is the way to the place where the light is distributed, or where the east wind is scattered? Do you know where the wind starts and stops? And do you know about that, Job? Who has cleft a channel for the torrents of rain and a way for the thunderbolt? Tell me what you know about thunder and lightning. To bring rain on a land where no man is, or on the desert in which there is no man. To satisfy the waste and desolate land, and to make the ground sprout with grass. He keeps on asking questions. Has the rain a father? Who has begotten the drops of dew? Can you tell me why there's dew on the grass? Can you tell me how that works? From whose womb did the ice come forth? Who has given birth to the frost of heaven? Tell me a little bit more about what you know about the freezing points and the boiling points and things like that. The waters become hard like stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. Well, how's that happen, Job? Can you figure out how I did that? It's pretty cool when you think about it, right? He says, can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? Tell me about the stars, Job. Tell me about the stars. Tell me about the constellations. Can you lead forth the Mazzaroth in their season? Can you guide the bear with its children? He's talking about constellations in the sky. Do you know the ordinances of the heavens? Can you establish their rule on the earth? Can you lift up your voice to the clouds that a flood of waters may cover you? Can you send forth lightnings that they may go and say to you, here we are? Look at verse 36. Who has put wisdom in the inward parts, or given understanding to the mind? Right here, when God's asking all these questions to Job, he's admitting what we've been talking about here today. Who did that? God says, I did, Job. And you don't even understand it, not even an inkling. You don't even get it. And you try to question me and my purposes? We get it a little bit more now than Job did, but our knowledge isn't even close to the knowledge and wisdom and understanding of God, even as much as we think we know. God asked the question, who has put wisdom in the inward parts? Who's put intelligence inside of us, or given understanding to the mind? Who can number the clouds by wisdom? Who can tilt the water skins of the heavens when the dust runs into a mass and the clods stick fast together? Can you tell me about mud, Job, and how mud works? These are funny questions, some of them, and yet making a point. What's the point? God is all-knowing. God is all-knowing. God is that intelligent designer who's made the world and all that is in it and all that is even within us. He is the source of information. The psalmist would say this in Psalm 94, "Understand, O dullest of the people, fools, when will you be wise? He who planted the ear, does he not hear? He who formed the eye, does he not see? He who disciplines the nations, does he not rebuke? And he who teaches man knowledge." He who teaches man knowledge. All that knowledge, all that information, ultimately, God is saying it comes, the psalmist is saying it comes from God. The Lord, he knows the thoughts of man, that they are but a breath. We need to respect and admire the omniscience of God. For our God is someone who knows the past, all of it. He knows how the earth was formed. He's eternal. He was there. He knows how all of these things function and how all of these things work. And we see that declared in his word. Exodus 3 and verse 14. God said to Moses, "I am who I am." And he said, "Thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you." That I am suggests the eternity of God. He is, he always will be, he is the I am. He knows the past. He knows the present. In Psalm 33, we see the psalmist declaring that. He knows everything that is happening now, and he knows that we're here right now. He knows the present. Psalm 33, verses 13 through 15, declares the omniscience of God and his knowledge of the present. It says, "The Lord looks from heaven. He sees all the sons of men. From the place of his dwelling he looks on all the inhabitants of the earth. He fashions their hearts individually. He considers all their works." He sees. He's omniscient. He's all-knowing. And he not only knows the past and knows the present, but our God, he even knows the future. In Acts 17 and verse 31, as Paul spoke to the people of Athens, in Acts 17 and verse 31, this is what Paul says to them. It says in verse 31, "He has appointed a day." Okay, this is God. God who doesn't overlook our ignorance anymore. He commands all men everywhere to repent. He has appointed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by the man whom he has ordained. One day in the future, we are all going to stand before the judgment seat of Christ, and we are going to be judged by the all-knowing God. Are you prepared to stand before him? Are you prepared to stand before him? I'll tell you what, when you consider the complexities of the cell and all that is within it, and all that God must have known to have put just that process into order, and the fact that he is declared to us as all-knowing, omniscient, knows everything about your past. He knows every little sin that I've committed. He knows everything that I've done. He knows everything that I'm doing right now. He knows that everything that you're going to do in the future. I do not want to stand before that God guilty. And the only way that I cannot stand before him guilty is if I am washed through the blood of his Son, Jesus Christ, of my sins. He has sent his Son to die on a cross so that our sins could be forgiven and be washed away. And we need to believe in that Son. We need to turn from our sins. We need to be baptized into Jesus Christ so we can live a new life, realizing that our life is lived in his sight and in his presence and needs to be lived for his glory and for his purposes. If you're not living that way yet, I encourage you to do so. I encourage you to do so, because you cannot outsmart the all-wise and all-knowing Father in heaven. Galatians 6, 7, and 8 says, "Be not deceived." You know why it says be not deceived? Because sometimes we are deceived. Sometimes we are tricked into thinking. It says, "Be not deceived. If you sow to the Spirit, you will of the Spirit reap life everlasting. But if you sow to the flesh, you will reap of the flesh eternal condemnation." And God knows. So don't think that you can live your life outside of his presence, him not knowing how you're living your life. You're either living your life for him and for his glory, or you're not. And so we would beg and implore you, because of our all-knowing, all-powerful God, to make sure that you're living your life right in his sight. If there's anything that we can do to help you do that and get on that road or get back on that road, we would encourage you to come while we sing this invitation song.